40 years ago, the Club of Rome indicated that there would be limits to growth. The world's destruction from overconsumption was imminent. Not only would this overconsumption result in the depletion of natural resources, it would also lead to serious pollution. The remedy against all this, as suggested by the Club of Rome, would be for people to use these resources more efficiently, to develop sustainable technologies and to adjust their lifestyles. Today, almost 40 years later, environmental issues are still high on the agenda, especially those of climate change and biodiversity loss. In their latest report, Growing Within Limits, the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency concludes that current trends are not sustainable but can be turned around. To indicate what would be needed to bring about trends that are more sustainable, the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency looked at two particular themes, that of energy and climate and that of agriculture and biodiversity, and looked at how these interconnect. The main question to be answered was whether it would be possible to limit the Earth's warming to no more than 2 degrees Celsius while keeping biodiversity loss to a minimum. To remain under these 2 degrees Celsius, greenhouse gas emissions would need to be halved globally, which for the Western world could even mean a reduction of 80 to 90%. In order to do this, we would need to produce goods and services more economically and with greater efficiency. We would have to find alternative energy sources, and we would need to develop an entirely different energy system. When looking at transport, electric driving currently is one of the most attractive options. In vehicles with powerful batteries, preferably charged with green energy that is widely available. Such a large-scale application of green energy would need a completely new infrastructure, which we could start creating today. Halting biodiversity loss means, first and foremost, saving forests instead of cutting them down, which would also help against climate change, as forests store CO2. In this respect, agricultural land use is an issue. The challenge is to produce more food on less land. Current production of food is mostly inefficient, and in the Western world we throw much of our food away. In agriculture, much is lost before, during and after harvesting. Feeding 9 billion mouths requires investment in increased and more efficient food production. Meat production uses large land areas. 80% of current agricultural areas are used to produce only 20% of our protein intake. A transition in developed countries to low meat diet, as recommended also for health reasons, would benefit both climate and forests. Preserving marine biodiversity would require prevention of overfishing. A sustainable future is possible, technologically speaking. The investments would be considerable, but not necessarily a barrier for further economic development, if we choose broadly based, smart solutions. A dynamic approach would save much larger costs in future. People would become healthier, thanks to cleaner air and better food. In addition, the cost of climate policy could be reduced if food and energy production become more sustainable. However, large investments alone will not be enough to achieve all this. First of all, transition to alternative energy and food production patterns may sometimes require difficult decisions. For instance, intensive agriculture and production of biofuels also involve risks. A transition will also require consumers, government administrations and companies to make different choices. The world is experiencing 3 crises at once, those of climate, food and credit. A sustainable future calls for an integrated approach of the credit crisis, the climate crisis and the food crisis. Now, more information is available to support decision-making than 40 years ago. The Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency contributes to this with integrated analysis, like the one presented in Growing Within Limits.